YouTube users have been asking me to do a video on my deconversion from Christianity for some time, so I'm taking the time to do the video now for you, and I hope that this answers any questions that you have. To give you a brief history as far as my religious background, both of my parents are Christian. I was raised a Christian. We were Protestant, but I went to a Catholic high school, studied theology for 4 years, and then went on to college and studied biology. I was never, very religious. Neither of my parents were either. It was more so, we believed in God, went to church, did that sort of thing, but we were hardly fanatical or anything like that. And that begs the question then, well, what got me to change my beliefs? And the sad thing is that here in America, the default position is that most people are Christian until you have a reason not to be. Okay, so the default position, once again, you are Christian until something happens and you are no longer a Christian. It's in reality, it should be, you don't believe in a God until you see evidence and then you make your choice. Not in America. So what basically caused me to really change and examine my religious beliefs was dealing with creationists. I didn't understand their point of view. I had studied evolution intensively, and it baffled me how people could still believe in creationism despite the overwhelming evidence for evolution. So I spent a lot of time on creationist websites trying to understand their point of view and trying to kind of get a grasp of their arguments. And when I did so, I was just horrified. It was nothing but bastardization and butchery of biology. It became clear that taking scientific advice from these people would be akin to taking historical advice from someone who didn't know that the North won the Civil War. In short, creationists and just their lunacy, it made me be so repulsed by them that I didn't want anything to do with these people. And that was what provided the short, sharp shock that was necessary for me to kind of get nudged back and examine my religious beliefs objectively. And so had it not been for them, I never really would have thought about it. So once I was free to examine my religious beliefs, the first thing that I thought of, or that I realized, was that I was sectioning my religious beliefs off from and holding them in a special area that was exempt from, nowhere else in my life had I done that, or did I do that. One of the main reasons that I abandoned Christianity was because of something called the null hypothesis. And whether or not you realize it, you do it every day. It's basically the idea that there is no default position. And to overcome that, you need to supply evidence. Let's say that I propose that I have a magical sandwich that cures cancer. It's not up to you to provide the evidence that it doesn't cure cancer. It's up for me to provide the evidence that it does. And if I were to sit there and say, well, prove to me that it doesn't, or well, what if you have cancer and you're wrong, and you don't pay $50,000 for my magic sandwich? Well, you die. That's not a logical reason to believe, and anyone who proposed such a thing would be laughed at. So again, the null hypothesis is that there is a default position, which is atheism. And in order to overcome that and adopt a religion, you need to see evidence. And I clearly didn't have any or hadn't seen any. I'd also like to examine it from a historical perspective, in the sense that everything that we've ever experienced has turned out to have natural explanations. Take, for example, rainbows. 300 years ago, these were a surefire sign of God's existence. I mean, how could those colors know to spontaneously arrange themselves the same way every time? It was clear that God existed. Yet, when we actually sit there and look at it, no, there's a scientific explanation for it. Same thing with the origin of our species. How the human body is so perfectly designed, look at nature, look at this and that, but when we actually study it, no. Evolution. There's the overwhelming evidence indicates that there's a natural explanation for it, and there's no God needed. So, in short, I guess I'm siding with history. Religious, supernatural, magical explanations have a winning track record of 0. Natural explanations, on the other hand, have won out every single time. Now, people could say, well, everything that exists has a beginning, and if it begins, it has to have a creator. The universe exists, therefore it began, therefore it has a creator. But then you could ask the question, well, what created God? And then they would probably reply, well, God always existed. Well, if you're going to say that, then why not save a step, to quote Sagan, and just say that the universe already existed? Be consistent. Another thing that happened was that in examining my religious beliefs, I realized that a number of things didn't make sense. And to quote Hitchens, I think that he had a very good argument with this, and that's, human beings have been around about 100,000 years. And for 98,000 years, heaven sat around with its arms folded, watching human beings die, mostly of their teeth, of microorganisms they didn't know existed, living in just absolutely terrible conditions. And then 2,000 years ago, he decides that it's time for an intervention. And the best way to do that is to send a human sacrifice to Bronze Age Palestine to be essentially murdered and then come back 3 days later. It didn't make any sense to me. Also, taking a look at this all-powerful, all-loving God, I mean, read the Bible. How many innocent infants have been killed by him? I mean, we're talking about infants here. Grown men might be one thing, but infants. Another thing was that just an all-knowing, all-powerful God wouldn't make these mistakes. He wouldn't need to send a flood. He wouldn't need to do all of these things. I mean, basically the Bible is riddled with a God who's made mistakes, which is essentially just completely counterintuitive to the concept of omniscience. And then there are other arguments as well. Like, for example, one thing that I saw, this was posted by, there's a Religion 101 exam, and I'll link to it in the video description. But one of the questions is, you are a product tester and frequently bring your work home. Yesterday, while dressed in a flame-resistant suit up to 3,000 degrees and carrying the latest model fire extinguisher, you discovered your neighbor's house on fire. As the flames quickly spread, you stood by and watched the family perish. All of the following, or which of the following, rather, describes your behavior? All-powerful, all-knowing, all-loving, or mysterious? So basically, there's an inconsistency here. If you were to apply any of the arguments that people apply for God to anything else in your life, you would be laughed at and it would seem absolutely ridiculous.